Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Good morning. Welcome to another segment of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. Our guest today is Representative Chris Hall from Sioux City. Welcome, Chris.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming in.
Very glad to.
Chris, I just want to kind of go through a couple things that I know that you are involved with in the legislature, and if you could kind of go through some of the committees that you serve on and kind of what's going on in those committees, that'd be great, I think, to kind of start this out for the folks.
Sure. So I'm just starting my third term in the House. Right now I serve on the Appropriations, Commerce, and Natural Resources Committees. So most of the legislative work that I do is on the budget. It's on issues that affect industry and business, and issues that affect conservation, parks, and hunting.
Mm-hmm. What's this week going to be like for you? This is the funnel week, which we'll talk about a little later on.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point in session. It often kind of speeds the rest of session up, and it's kind of a pivot point for us to start moving ahead. Mm-hmm. With funnel week, it's a procedural deadline, which means if any bill doesn't reach a certain threshold by this week, it's no longer eligible for debate during the session. So you'll see a lot of legislators hustling on pet projects. You'll see subcommittees and committees really gear up, and probably be a pretty busy week for us.
Chris, and just kind of because that funnel week's kind of an interesting thing. So this is the funnel. This is the first funnel, right? There's two funnels in the legislative session.
Correct. First funnel's this week, and then next one's a few weeks down the line.
So every bill that is eligible that goes through the funnel will be discussed in the next 4 weeks too, and then they'll have another cut of the bills in the second funnel. Is that correct?
Correct. So this week you'll see for a bill to remain eligible, it has to pass out of a committee, either in the House or the Senate.
Okay.
For the next few weeks, we have to make sure that the bill is moving on both tracks in both chambers. So for it to remain eligible after the second funnel, it has to have passed out of one full chamber, either the House or Senate, and then it also has to be passed out of a committee in the other chamber.
Got it. Okay. Very good. That's interesting. So tell me, what do you do? You're a young man. What do you do for your employment? I know you're a state representative, but
and the fun part about Iowa is that we have a citizen legislature. So all legislators probably have another career or profession that they have outside of the Capitol. Mm-hmm. I work as a grant writer for the community college in Sioux City. It's Western Iowa Tech. I've been working there for a little over 4 years, and I'm very fortunate that they understand the odd routine that it is to be a legislator.
Yep. Now I know Representative Hall, I know we talked about the legislative session, but kind of go through that again a little bit more in depth about where we're at in the legislative session right now.
Sure.
I mean, if we were to make the analogy of this being a football game, where would we be in the football game right now?
Well, the analogy that I might lend would be that it's a slow-moving football game this year. Uh-huh. With passage of the fuel tax last week, I think that it's going to provide some more oxygen in the building that really hasn't been there for other topics.
Sure.
Typically, over the last few years, the legislature has budget targets that are issued in late February. Right now, you've got the House and the Senate both holding off on releasing their budget targets until after a March 19th revenue estimating conference meeting. Mm-hmm. So with kind of budget targets on hold and probably going to be released in late March, about a month later than they typically have been, the public should also know that we're probably moving slower this year. Even though we're supposed to adjourn on May 1st, it could be very likely that we're debating the budget into mid or late May.
Mm. Very good. How can we, and going back to one of your committee, natural resources, how can we enhance natural resources in the state, and what would be the next steps that we would take to do that, something like that?
I think that you've probably heard a lot of interest among the public on natural resources issues the last few years. Mm-hmm. In 2010, Iowa voters passed a constitutional amendment that would create what's called the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. So it's a trust fund that would be established to enhance clean water, clean air, trails, parks and recreation issues. And each year, once funded, it would have about $150 million to devote to those issues. I do think that there's widespread support. It's not really a very partisan issue, which is also good. When it was approved, you saw Democrats and Republicans voting in favor of it, and you also saw that pretty equitably distributed across the state. So the next steps for the legislature would be to fund that trust fund. That would require some work on a sales tax increase and hopefully some offsets just to make sure that it doesn't hit working families too hard. But I do think that you'll see surveys that have been conducted, I think the most recent of which showed about 82% of Iowa voters support creating that trust fund.
Excellent. Very good. What can be done to retain more young families? I know we're kind of jumping back and forth, but you know, it's important. You're a young man. What can we do to keep the youth and professional people in our state? You know.
Well, working as a young legislator, it's an issue that I listen to from peers. It's an issue that's very important to me personally, and I think it all really does tie back to quality of life issues. A recent Princeton study showed that college graduates aged 21 to 35 are more likely to choose where they locate based on quality of life issues than what they have available for professional opportunities. So that means people are moving to a place where they might enjoy the activities they'll participate in on their weekend more than worry about who's going to cut their paycheck.
Sure.
So if you tie that back to issues like natural resources, outdoor recreation, you want to make sure that there's plenty of opportunities for young families and young professionals to try and you know, have parks and access to outdoor recreation. But you also have to think about some of the different long-term quality of life pieces like affordability. Iowa has always, compared to peer states, been very successful in how we are affordably. But I think there are some things that the state could consider, like tax credits to help defray the cost of child care. We might also do more just to make sure that higher education and graduate level education are available and accessible to the public.
I think we, I know that we have a huge trail system, a bike trail system in Iowa, and I think we're noted for that. I mean, and we get high ratings for that. So that's just one of many things that I think you're talking about that for quality of life issues that are bringing young families back here.
If you talk to young professionals, what do they want to do when they get done with work for the end of the day? What do they want to do during their weekend? It's going to be cultural amenities, concerts, the arts. It's going to be outdoor opportunities. It's trying to at least create some sort of a setting where they feel comfortable setting up roots, buying their first home, starting their family, and usually once they have those roots established, they're there for the long term.
Yep. Very good. Well, speaking of bicycles and trails, you kind of have some interesting news or some exciting news.
We out in Sioux City, we're going to be the first overnight stop for Ragbri this year. The last time we hosted was actually within the last 5 years, and I think that Iowans and people from across the country really enjoyed coming to Sioux City, so we're excited for it again this year. We've got Huey Lewis and the News are playing to kick off the bike ride, and it's something that I do each year, and I'm very excited to have some friends joining me for.
Very good. The state Senate passed a bill increasing the minimum wage to $8.75 last week. Does Iowa need an increase in the minimum wage?
I think that looking at the bill the Senate passed, it's something that the state really can and should be acting on. When you talk about $8.75 an hour, that's something people might be surprised to know who that's affecting. If we increased it to $8.75, it would improve the wage of 112,000 Iowans, which is a large share of our state, large share of our state's workforce. And I think that it's also important to know those workers aren't really the ones people might think they are. Of people who are working a wage that would be impacted by $8.75, 72% of them are over the age of 20, 44% work full-time, 59% are women, and 20% of those families have children. For those families that are working a minimum wage job, it accounts for 44% of their family's income. So we're not just talking about teenagers who are maybe sacking groceries after they finish school for the day.
Right.
We're really talking about people who have families, and the amount that they're earning in those wage jobs affects what they can put on the dinner table. I think the numbers are very compelling on their own, but it's even more compelling when you see states like Nebraska and South Dakota increasing their minimum wage. It's something that the state can act on, and we really should.
And I've read statistically what the minimum passing of the minimum wage does for employers. I think they said it increased retention of employees by 70%. So I mean, and the production part of it, the productivity of an employee goes way up as well. So I mean, there's some good arguments for the increase in the minimum wage.
Well, and we rely on working with private industry to make sure that any public policy decisions made at the Capitol are helped along and delivered by business in a way that works for them. If we're passing a minimum wage, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that allows for businesses to plan and know the timeline for which it's coming.
Sure. Chris is a Democrat from Northwest Iowa. What do you see the status of your party heading into the next election cycle?
It's been an interesting learning experience being one of the few Democrats west of I-35. I was first elected in 2010, which was a tough election cycle for Democrats, as was the last midterm in 2014. Right now, I think that we really need to find the soul of our party. I think that we only holding one federal office in the state and also holding a limited number of statewide offices, we really need to look at ways to build our bench. I think that we need to become more effective in how we communicate, and I think that we really need to focus on making the case for policies that Democrats are good advocates for. Part of that is some of the things that I'm trying to do here today. If you dig into the data and you look at the numbers, you can absolutely make a case for things like the minimum wage and quality of life issues. And I think that Democrats digging into the data is probably one thing that you'll see from our party moving forward.
Chris, so what do you see now that the gas tax is behind us a little bit, and things will kind of, like you said, there'll be more oxygen down there in the State House now to deal with other issues. What do you see as a couple big issues that are going to probably be taken up before the session is over?
I think that you'll see both chambers working to move forward on some anti-bullying provisions. It's been an issue that's been really brought up each of the last 2 years. I think from last year, most of the differences between the House and Senate have been agreed upon, and the bills that were competing last year really had more similarities than they did differences. So I think anti-bullying legislation, there's a very good chance that we're going to be sending something forward to help improve broadband access in rural communities. And I also think that there's probably going to be some public safety issues, maybe some Second Amendment rights types of issues that come up, and we'll just have to see whether they move forward and how they move forward.
There was several big articles in today's Des Moines Register about broadband in this state, and I don't know if you had a chance to read those or not, but it definitely seems to be an important factor for quality of life issues. You're talking about quality of life, both for businesses and residential people as well. So, I mean, it is an interesting thing. There's been a lot of broadband. Broadband seems to be the hot issue nationally and statewide and locally right now. So.
Yeah, I think the reason that you hear legislators discuss broadband and greater access to broadband is the fact that it does tie into so many issues. It's providing education. It's providing better health care in rural communities. It's access to information, and we realize that not having that access is creating some inequities. So the state does have reason to look at it. We have a reason to invest in it and really work with partners in private industry to make sure that it moves forward.
Well, Chris, anything else that you'd like to add to? Is there something on your mind that you want to end the show with, or we had a pretty thorough discussion on issues. So
the only thing I'd add is I'm glad for the invitation and proud to be working for the folks of Sioux City down here.
Yep. Well, I think you do a good job. So
thank you.
Chris Hall from Sioux City, thank you very much for being on Capitol Preview this morning.
Thank you, Bill.
Stay tuned for former state senator Jeff Angelo. We'll talk about the almighty funnel that will occur at the end of this week. Thank you.